Good morning. Let's see if I can do it on time. So you already know me. I did the presentation about the publishing and archiving data. So now I will focus on organizing, versioning, and documenting data based on some generic and agnostic, like say, content. So I thought a bit about what to present here, as several things related with documenting and versioning is quite attached to the specific tools that we use, specific services and tools available in the organization, as Tiago also raised this issue. So I will do my best to present some generic things. So reasons for organizing, what is really critical in terms of organization of data sets, file naming and renaming, versioning conventions, providing some consistency to the data files, and the electronic lab notebook. So this was not the right moment to do my presentation, and as I was participating in another meeting, and now my colleagues are in fact presenting the thing that I should have presented in the other meeting. So maybe we can do it later. Okay, so let me just check here with my colleagues if I can progress or not. The short orientation that we prepared, anesthesia also. Okay, let me progress. Sorry, I was just checking with my colleagues if they can present this later, because then it will be a mess. Okay, why manage data? Just I want to just highlight some things here that are related with the content that I want to highlight. So for sure, this will make our life easier. So properly managing data, so preparing data management plans, as Tiago raised. Also proper documenting the data, anticipating issues on the organization of data, try to have kind of conventions to proper organize our information. Can you hear me well, or it's a mess as my colleague is talking?
We can hear it perfectly, Pedro.
Okay,
yes, it's okay.
Yeah, there's no problem.
So it's my problem that I'm
It's your problem, yeah.
I will try to concentrate myself, not the right timing. And this is really important, and this will make our life much easier. Then also proper documenting data, proper using the tools to have proper policies for backups, for preservation, will allow us to save data for later. Proper documenting, proper organizing the data, anticipating some of our issues when it comes to work together in teams with other colleagues, do this kind of conventions to organize data, will make our life easier when it comes to data share and publish data for reuse. Documentation metadata is critical for data citation, to get credit for the data that we publish. Then I can also share a link, an interesting link that I saw during the weekend, an article published in Nature about the importance of getting more visibility to data and more visibility to the credits of data. Then also all these good practices will avoid accusations of fraud or bad science. So this is really important and meet the funder requirements. But I just want to highlight the things about the things in the first three things in the left side of the column. So make research easier, save data for later, share data for use, because some simple things will really make our life easier. Organizing data, it's a critical thing. So I will highlight versioning, organizing, versioning, and documenting. Okay, reasons for organizing. facilitate search of the files that we are generating individually or in a group, on a research group, time saving. Clearly also separate the different phases of the project, where we can also have an overview of the whole, but if we organize properly the files that we are generating, the structure of folders, this will make our life much easier. Then to separate original files from work files. This is an important way to organize, and this is critical. What is really important, of course, even the organizations and documentation is really critical when it comes to an individual search, a PhD thesis, something like that. But when it comes to working teams, it will facilitate a lot our life. One of the critical things in the organizations is naming and labeling research data files. There are three things that are critical here: organizations, context, and the consistency. These are the main criteria for naming and labeling the research data files. So organization, organization is quite critical. It's quite important to access then the files, to proper to save time. Then the context is also critical. This could be included in content specific or descriptive information, and the consistency is also quite relevant. These are should be the main criteria for giving names to the files, to proper label the research data files. So organization, context, and consistency. Trying to put in the names of the files, these three criteria is really, really important. So we should have a strategy for file naming. Based on description of the content, if we have kind of project number or sub projects or sub folders to organize our names is really critical. So description of the content, the project name, the name of the creator, the name of research team or departments or the research units or the research groups in the research units, then the creation of the data and the publication of the data and the version names. So trying to have a strategy that we can integrate in the organization of the files, in the naming of the files. This 6 approaches is really important and critical. In the MOOC that we did, let me check if I can open here yes, it's here. Can you see the screen? Yes, I suppose you can see it.
Yes, Pedro.
Let me take. So this I have in the MOOC that we did. Can you see the video, Philippa? Just
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the MOOC that we did for the essentials RDM that I already spoke about in the last presentation in March. We did like a 1-minute video highlighting some of the main actions in terms of naming the files. It's in Portuguese, but I will continue to speak in English. So some tips that are really critical is to create names that are so clear and with a significant meaning. So we should also try to avoid using special characters in the name of the files. This is an important tip. In a big project, so using generic names will make our life really hard. So avoid generic names. Then we can also like entering into conflict with the name of the folder, then have the same name of the file inside of a folder that have exactly the same name. This type of things are critical. Also, when it comes to naming, one thing that we need to think about is to create and to give names to the files that others will understand, not only us. And then we can also understand after 1 year of the file creation. Sometimes we also create files, give names to files, and we don't realize the meaning later, 1 year later or something like that. And try to, like, following these 3 criteria of the organization, of the consistency and the conventions, try also to put some descriptive information in the naming. So, for example, dates, which is really important in some cases. Then some practical tips also to avoid sometimes of characters that will make our life more difficult when it comes to file naming, because some of the characters are used also programmatically to identify for example, extensions of files. When it comes to when we put dots, we usually generate a kind of extension. So this is important, okay, just for you to be aware. And then including dates, we need to do it in a consistent way, because sometimes we put the months in here, sometimes we put day, months in here in numbers, sometimes we use alphanumeric way to represent dates. So everything is really critical when it comes to sorry, I was answering my phone. I forgot to present the last one. So we can also use also sometimes it's interesting to use the extensions of the files to identify the files, which is sometimes this is critical when it comes to the use of some instruments and these kind of things. Okay, so this was a video that we did. It's a 1-minute video. I think that this is interesting to use it, and it's quite practical to see it. So you can have access to the video. I will share the slides so you can have access to the video. That I think it was interesting and useful. So in terms of organization, naming is critical. Do you see this example that I took from this mantra from University of Edinburgh mantra course? Trying to provide a file name with more descriptive information, or for example, for an interview, where you can have the interview, where you can have the date of the interview, the participant ID that we link to the ID of the spreadsheet, for example. This is really important. Sometimes we just save as the document as it is. Then when we have 20 or 30 files, we realize that we are not proper organizing the files. We need to rename it. So having a kind of convention to provide consistency to the naming is really critical. This is a generic thing. Maybe you think that this is so simple that is not relevant for organization, but this is one of the critical things when it comes to do a PhD thesis, that we realize that we didn't take into consideration some of these tips. And also when we work in groups and in research units, in teams, we realize that having these conventions for naming and labeling of research data files is really critical. So you, as a data steward, should also advise researchers to have this kind of conventions and to provide this consistency to the data files. Just to finalize this part, one remark is important, that we use different tools that generate automatically and name automatically the files. So if we think that this automatic generation of file names is not good for us in terms of organization, or is not complying with the conventions that we have, for example, in our team, so we can also have rename them manually, or have a kind of batch renaming. There are some interesting tools. If you search in SourceForge, for example, for open source software, there are some softwares to batch renaming, for example, files in folders, and maybe you can also advise when it comes to a critical situation that we really need to rename hundreds of files. You can use some kind of software or online applications that provide you a facility for this. Okay, I think I already highlighted sufficient that organization and having in mind these kinds of naming conventions to provide better organization and consistency to the data files is really critical in research streams, or when we start a project consortium, we start generating files, we start organizing documents. So someone in charge of organizing our own, for example, cloud of the project, to create the folders, to give some instructions, to put this kind of information in a project handbook. This is really critical. Sometimes we don't give the sufficient attention to this kind of small things, that then it becomes critical when it comes to proper sharing the data, proper distribute the data among the project consortium members, this kind of things. So this is really important, and that we should have in mind. So I just put this slide that I took from an interesting support materials from the RDM team in Edinburgh, that they have a kind of 13 rules, that they have rules for the conventions for the naming conventions. And I think they are interesting. So think about, you can have it, and for all the rules they have a kind of additional support information. Okay, so if you want to prepare some instructions in your institution, please check this. I will upload here the slides directly also in the chat. Okay, versioning. So this was what I want to highlight in terms of organizing. Of course, I should have also, we can do a 1 hour presentation about organizing data files. So I just want to highlight, I think, some that is critical in terms of, for example, PhD thesis or in teams work. Now, versioning. Important to say that there are some interesting tools, some that to help on this. It's interesting that Tiago, they are also thinking for EGC to also to have a tool to support this. I will just also identify some critical issues that we have in terms of versioning, and some tips and tools available, because it's quite critical to identify and distinguish the different versions of the research files we are generating. I think for versioning is a similar approach to what we have also for naming of files. So we need to do it in a consistent way, and we need to have conventions for us individually, for us to understand the different versions 1 or 2 years after, and for the team. Okay. So we have a cartoon here, an interesting cartoon here, just to to present that tragedy of managing versions of a thesis, for example, when it comes, or a final, or preparation of an article, a final version of the article, when we did the final, but then we realized that we have final 2, then final with additional comments, final with corrections to the comments. This is an interesting comic cartoon. But what is critical here is that for us to have some consistency. Of course, following exactly the conventions and having consistency when we have we are in a stressful situation at the end of finalizing something that we need to deliver. So sometimes we just write final, and it's done. But if we try to do the best to follow the conventions, it should be interesting. In conventions, for example, clearly distinguish the different versions that we have when it's a major or a minor change. When it's a major, we just renumber 1, 2, 3. When it's a minor, we just can put 1.1, 2.2. And this is something that is important for us to follow. And what is interesting is that this approach, this clear convention, is already being used when it comes to published data. You can see this in Zenode, or you can see also this in the Dataverse, for example, the repository, the software that we use here in Minho for data repository, and then you have also in Biodata, the Biodata DMP portal, for you to deposit and publish data. So the approach is the same. So in fact, you can upload a version of the files like you see here in this example from a specific data set in Minho repository. You have version 1, and then you can do some change where you change the description, or you change 1 or 2 files, or you add 2 or 3 files, and you consider that you are in fact creating a new version of the data sets, so 2.0, and then you do a small change or a small update that you consider not critical to change the data set, but then in addition to the data set, you renumber the version for 2.1. So you can do it in fact directly when you are uploading files in Dataverse. You can select if it is a minor or a major, and automatically the system generate the number of the files. So I took another example from Harvard, just to say that you can do it during a year, during 3, 4, 5 years, you can generate new versions of the data. Sometimes we have series of data sets, which make sense to have different versions. Sometimes we just a question of that we realize that we remove some files that they don't make sense at some point, and that we consider a new version. So in Zenodo, it's a similar situation. I took this example from some figures that in fact I'm using here in this presentation. You can see, and you can have it during 1 year, 2 years, and you can generate new versions. What is really interesting in Zenodo is that you have also DOI for each version, and you can see all versions as single records, or all versions merge into one record, and they can access, and you can have DOIs for different versions, which is interesting for kind of citation, etc., and for linking publications, so the data files, data sets to articles or to working papers that we are producing. So versioning, I just want to highlight these tips. It's important to say that using from the software perspective, so in GitHub and these kind of things, the versioning is quite well managed, and this is critical. There are some interesting also support information related with Git approach in life sciences that maybe you should try to check in Elixir training resources, because I suppose it's quite useful for you as data stewards to explore a bit more this part of the tools that are available to support versioning. But this should be the convention. Okay, there are some noise in the background, so be aware that some people have microphone unmuted. So the last topic, documenting, ensure that data is searchable and unambiguously understood. For documenting, we can also talk a lot, but in this short presentation, what I think is critical documenting data is that documenting is really important for the researcher himself and for the team. So help yourself and help others. A brief description of some of the components of the data sets that we are collecting or that we are generating or that we are processing or analyzing is really critical, maybe very important in the collection process. That if we don't proper document some of the options that we did, some of the ways that we are organizing data, this will make our life really hard some months later or some years later. And of course, to help our colleagues or to help others that want to access our data, to reuse our data when we publish the data. One of the topics, the critical topics in terms of reproducibility of science is documentation. Is that the documentation is not sufficient, is not properly attached to the data set. So we need to also to do an extra effort when it comes to proper documenting data, to provide the information in terms of terms, variables, processes, procedures, options that we did, that then others can open the files, download the files when we have it available, and proper describe it. So try to present it in a simple way. This is also a diagram that we also use it in the RDM, the Essentials RDM MOOC that we did in 2020 and 2021. So description of the collection process, this description of the data set, the data itself, and description of the changes. This is what is really critical in the documentation. When it comes to documenting a data set, where we have different files, we should make a README file available attached to the files, a code book attached to the files, a methodology note attached to the files. So we should put in the same data set files, and then also documentation about the files. So in the description of the metadata, when we put the data available, and we deposit the data available in proper repositories or proper data archives, or attach it to the folder where we have the file. So we create a disclaimer, a README file, a methodological note, etc. So we can use it in different ways, trying to describe the collection process, description of the data sets of the files, and the description of the changes. If we do changes during the 1 year or 2 years, which is something natural. So in this way we ensure that the data is properly understood by us and by others. So some examples to make it more practical, some examples of data documentation. So of course we can have the experimental protocols using the laboratory notebooks. It's really important. Sometimes it's a question of taking a photo to to the lab notebook. If it is in an electronic mode, this will facilitate a lot our lives. The code books are interesting. Some situations is possible also to prepare some kind of data dictionaries. Attach the questionnaires and the surveys, for example, to the files with the answers. Also, sometimes it's important also to, if the database is quite complex, to have a kind of schema representation of the database, methodology report, information about instruments, about equipments. This is important in some situations. If we don't have the instrument calibration, it's critical. So these are some examples of ways to properly document the data that we can attach to the files, or that we can have it linking to the files when it comes to organize files in folders, or when it comes to deposit data in data files in data archives or data repositories. Okay, and I'm finishing. So data documentation is critical at the project level, at the research project level, at the database level, at the file or the database level, and also at the item level. Of course, in some cases, at the item level is not so critical because everything is properly documented and explained in the file level. But then it's also important at the project level also to present our options to use for a specific collection of data, for a specific way to do things. So just to summarize, so why, how the data documentation is important. Just 2 slides to highlight, as Tiago already raised this an important issue about moving labs to a kind of more digital approach is critical for this good research data management practices, and will make our life easier, and of course using the proper tools. Electronic lab notebooks are quite important here. I will not do a presentation. I just want to highlight that electronic lab notebooks can support the organization and the proper documentation of data, really to support the ecosystem, to support the process, and will make our life really easier. Just a kind of tip: there is a really interesting resource in Zenodo, available in Zenodo, that you can find. I have it open here just for you to check. The link is here in this UI. So electronic lab notebook comparison metrics. If you are thinking about having a solution like Tiago presented for Gulbenkian, for Institute Gulbenkian of Science, you can check this. Unfortunately, it's a data set that it's not updated anymore. The last version is from May last year. So, but it's really good stuff. You can check it. It's a really for example, you can have a PDF version, or you can have a spreadsheet. You can see the different tools available for electronic lab notebooks. Also to check the different features that a tool should have, and what is important, just two remarks to finish. What is important is that it's important to understand that we can have really professional solutions, we can have hosted solutions, we can have commercial solutions, we can have open source solutions, as Tiago presented their solution based on an open source software. But you can also have some conventions to use tools like Evernote, that is for notes, or others from Microsoft or from Google, that in fact OneNote, for example, or others, that it's for another purpose, but you can use it also for electronic lab notebooks. Of course, there are tools that are prepared by researchers with the contribution from researchers to become a standalone service for electronic lab notebooks. But it's important to say that we can have also an approach of electronic lab notebook based on some common tools. And then there are some features that you should take into consideration when it comes to interactivity, support, documenting, the storage, so the hosting solution, if it is cloud, local, or hybrid. So this is really interesting. If you want to think about that for your institutions, use data stewardship, you can have access to this. We are doing the same in Minho, as we have a project together with Institute Polytechnic from Bragança, that we want to have an electronic lab notebook solution. So we are analyzing this. And then to finalize, metadata is critical when it comes to documentation. It's important for us. Of course, metadata is more critical when it comes to deposit data in data archives or in data repositories. We need to follow some conventions. We need to have some generic and discipline specific metadata, and the metadata is there, but we need to prepare ourselves to, when it comes to deposit and proper data in the proper archive the data, we need to be ready to put the metadata. And we need to take into consideration that there are different types of metadata. Think about having prepared the data in terms of description, descriptive metadata, administrative metadata, and structural metadata. I'm just put here additional to this slide, and Filipa, these are my two last slides. A diagram that we put in the RDM, in the Essentials RDM MOOC, just to clearly present what is descriptive metadata, administrative metadata, and structural metadata. So the normal things that we know, the title, if we have a digital object identifier, a precedent identifier, so some tags or some subjects, some topics. So we are talking about descriptive metadata, and this is easy to find in Znode or in Dataverse or any other data archive. Then when we are depositing data in data archives or data repositories, we attach some administrative metadata. And when it comes to administrative metadata, we are talking about, for example, terms of use or access rights or even licenses. These are administrative metadata. Okay, title, author, DOIs, descriptive metadata, licenses, access rights, terms of use are administrative metadata. Other kinds of administrative metadata, sometimes some technical details of the files that we have in the data sets, or the formats of the data sets, or the version of the software of that specific file generated by a specific file. For example, the images, these examples we give agnostic examples, but images have administrative metadata attached to the photo, for example. We are talking about administrative metadata, just for you to make a sense of what we are talking about. Structural metadata, it's when it comes to relations between data sets and the project IDs or this kind of thing. So relations between data and the context of the data. This is when we are talking about structural metadata. But I think it makes your life easier to understand what we are talking about when it comes to descriptive, administrative, and structural metadata. Okay, we should have presented a lot more about organizing, versioning, and documenting research data. But I think when it comes to our role as data stewards, these are the practical things that we need to take into consideration. Then we should be aware that there are dozens of tools available to support the organization and the documentation of data. There are tools for versioning, there are tools to rename files, this kind of thing. So, then we need an entire day to work on that. I hope this information was useful, the way that I have structured it and presented, and I'm available for questions. And I will put now the slides here in the chat, and you are free to contact me later.
Pedro, thank you very much. It was quite interesting. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of tools that participants can consult and try to clarify. But obviously, if you have any doubt, we are here also to support. Once Pedro will leave the training, I will just give the opportunity if any of the participants wants to raise any question.
Okay.
I know that Silvio had here a question
in the
chat. Yeah.
Sorry, because in the beginning it was quite difficult for me to concentrate.
Yeah.
My colleagues Andre and Paula were speaking at the same time.
Yeah, it's difficult,
but,
I know.
Yeah, sorry for that, but I hope that it was comprehensive for you.
Sure,
yeah, Silvio.
Sure. I don't know if Silvio is in the call or not. Yeah.
Yes, I am. It's just a small question, because usually you have to avoid dots in names of the files, but usually for versioning, if it's not a big change, you should have a dot separating the versions, if it's 1.1 or 1.2. I don't know if this should be kept as an exception or should be avoided somehow.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, because we in the theory we said, okay, we should have, in fact, avoiding to use dots is important because of the extensions, but this is on for some cases. I think even the systems are improving a lot, and the confusion is not already so critical. I must confess that the conventions in my group, so it's not so strong for the dots in the versions, but I usually use underscore, but I see a lot dots in the versioning. So
it's true.
Yes, because sometimes it can be complicated for some software interpreting the data file.
Exactly.
Or the type of file that it's been working with, but it's very common to have dots in versioning. So usually I do an underscore or just change from 1 to 2 using integer, but it's usual to have it. So there's also the recommendation to not use it. So
yes, I think if it is not critical for the type of extension that we are using, to use the dot, we can use it, because this will not generate confusion. So dot and one number will never generate confusion with the dot and the letters, because this will not generate confusion with the extension. So I must confess that and the experience that I have already in 3 or 4 projects, when I was preparing the handbook, for example, and I was putting this kind of conventions, I was not clear for the part of the versioning. I never said that you cannot use dots, these kind of things, because this will not create problem only if we have unlucky to put some letters before the number, but this will not be critical. I must say that we can accept dots before a number.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have here a comment from Gianluca. He is mentioning that he likes how the file name ends with underscore final. So it's a nice comment.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone else wants to raise any question to Pedro. No. Okay, Pedro, thank you very much again. And it was an excellent presentation. So thank you very much.